Red Dead Redemption 2 was such a huge success because people loved being part of a gang of outlaws, robbing banks, robbing trains, rustling cattle, dying of tuberculosis. You know, outlaw shit. But despite it just being a video game, that is pretty much what the Old West was actually like. Gangs of outlaws roaming around, committing crimes and killing each other, and some of them became so good at what they did that it actually made them famous. Or infamous. Henry McCarthy, alias Billy the Kid. But before we get into the mad lad, it's your boy, Raid Shadow Legends. Raid is now one of the top 3 RPG games on the Google Play Store, and it's been nominated as a finalist in the Google Play's Best of 2019 Users' Choice Awards. Raid is free to play and has hit almost 15 million downloads in the last 6 months, and it has over 400 champions for you to collect and customise with different cosmetics and over 1 million different builds. Build a team from 16 different factions and complete the story mode, compete in the PvP arena, or go on raids with friends. The raid mode is adding more than 16 new champions every month, and you can even earn more champions, equipment and other items by completing progression rewards. Once you complete your progression rewards missions, you will get one of the best legendary characters in the game, the Arbiter. There's also even more content to be added to the game, as is detailed in this roadmap showing all of the upcoming content. If you click the link in the video description, you will get 100,000 silver, 50 gems, 1 energy refill and a free champion, Executioner. This offer is only available for the next 30 days. All of the rewards are available from your inbox within the game, and these rewards are for new players only. Thanks again guys, Raid are really helping us creators out, so I'm really happy that you guys are showing them a lot of support. Henry McCarthy was born in New York City in 1859. His parents were Catherine and Patrick McCarthy, and he had one younger brother named Joseph. His father Patrick suddenly died, so Catherine moved to Indianapolis with the 2 children, and while she was there she started a romance with a man called William Antrim, and in 1870 all 4 of them moved to Wichita, Kansas. They then moved to Santa Fe, where William and Catherine got married, and then in 1873 all of them moved to Silver City in New Mexico. Just a year later, when Henry was only 14 years old, his mother died of tuberculosis, so it was only him, his brother, and his stepfather William. Now, Henry and William did not get along and would argue often, and apparently William used to beat Henry, and the beatings apparently got even worse without his mother there to protect him. So Henry left home and went to a boarding house where he found room and board in exchange for doing work for the owners. But life wasn't that great for him. He really wasn't making a lot of money, so he couldn't afford proper food, and the death of his mother severely affected him. So a young boy at 14, out in the world on his own, no money in his pocket, and without any adult guidance, it was kind of inevitable he was going to fall into a life of crime. In 1875, Henry was caught stealing food, and then just 10 days after this, he and an accomplice called Sombrero Jack robbed a Chinese laundromat where they stole several items of clothing and 2 pistols. Henry hid the stolen goods in his room in the boarding house, but the items were discovered by the boarding house owner, who reported Henry to the authorities, and Henry was arrested. Henry was taken to the local jailhouse to await his trial, but due to him being a small, skinny, wiry little thing, he was able to actually squeeze through the bars of his cell and then shimmy up a chimney onto the roof and climb down and manage to escape. The next day, Henry's escape was written about in the Silver City Herald, and this was the first of many articles that were going to be written about Henry. Henry fled to his stepfather's house, and his stepfather was less than happy to see him, and after only a few days the stepfather decided to throw Henry out. But as Henry was leaving, Henry decided to rob him, and stole several items of clothing and several guns before running off into the wilderness, and this would be the last time that Henry and William would ever see each other. While travelling, Henry started using the name Henry Antrim after his stepfather instead of using his real name. This was obviously to make it easier for him to evade authorities. Henry fled to southeastern Arizona, where he ended up getting a job as a ranch hand for a very well-known rancher called Henry Hooker. The only problem was, every time Henry got paid, he would immediately go down to the local game house and gamble all of his wages away. While working as a ranch hand, Henry met a man called John Mackey, an ex-US cavalry private, now turned criminal, and he and Henry would steal horses from the soldiers that were stationed at the nearby US Army outpost called Camp Grant. Stealing horses from the army. We're off to a great start. Because Henry was quite small-framed, had a very boyish appearance, a little bit of wispy facial hair that made him look like a baby goat, and because he was usually the youngest person in whatever group he was in, people started referring to him as the Kid. In 1877, while drinking at a saloon in Bonita, Henry got into an argument with a local blacksmith called Francis Windy Cahill, who on many previous occasions had actually bullied Henry. Windy called Henry a pimp for some reason, and Henry finally plucked up the courage to stand up to his bully and called Windy a son of a bitch. Windy immediately threw Henry to the ground and started kicking the absolute shit out of him. But during the scuffle, Henry tried to reach for Windy's gun, and then the two men started fighting over the gun. Henry managed to successfully grab the gun and shot Windy in the chest, killing him. Henry then immediately fled the scene to avoid arrest. So Windy Cahill was the first ever person that Henry killed, but it wouldn't be the last. Witnesses did tell authorities that the killing was justified self-defence because Windy had attacked Henry first and was kicking the absolute shit out of him. But despite that, when Henry returned to the town a few days later, why would you do that? Why would you come back? Henry was immediately arrested by the local Justice of the Peace, Miles Wood. Henry was taken to Camp Grant and held in its guardhouse, but same as before, Henry managed to squeeze out of his cell, get out of the camp, steal a horse, and escape. This time he fled to New Mexico, but during the journey he was jumped by Apaches who stole his horse, so he had to walk many miles on foot to the nearest settlement. The nearest settlement was a place called Fort Stanton, but fortunately for Henry, he knew someone that lived there called John Jones, and Henry turned up at John's door almost dead from dehydration, and John's mother had to nurse Henry back to health. Once Henry was better, he travelled to Apache Tejo, which was an abandoned US Army outpost that was now occupied by a gang of cattle rustlers who were making a living off of stealing cattle from the local cattle magnate, John Chisholm. During this time, Henry started to use the alias William H. Bonney. William was shortened to Billy the Kid. And to save any confusion, I'm going to call him Billy for the rest of the video. Billy ended up finding work as a rancher for a man called John Henry Tunstall, who was trying to establish himself as a cattle magnate and merchant in Lincoln County, alongside his business partner and lawyer, Alexander McSween. The problem was, there already was an established cattle and merchant outfit in Lincoln County that was run by two men called Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan, and this outfit was named after the store that they conducted all their business from, the House. Tunstall found himself constantly clashing with the House because the House were trying to push him out so that they could maintain their monopoly, and they were constantly interfering with his business by buying up all the resources, telling people not to do business with him, and even threatening his clients. So there was a lot of tensions building up between John Tunstall and the House. This continued for a while, and things weren't exactly getting any better, but they also weren't getting any worse. But then came a series of events which basically snowballed this disagreement into an absolute fucking shit show. In 1978, a man called Emil Fritz passed away, and Emil Fritz had a life insurance policy and a will which dictated who was to inherit his estate. And Alexander McSween, John Tunstall's business partner, was a lawyer. So he was hired to manage the accounts and pay out who was supposed to be paid. But upon reviewing the documents, Alexander McSween noticed that all of the money, the life insurance policy, the will and the estate, all of it was to be paid to Lawrence Murphy because he was Emil Fritz's old business partner. This is the same Lawrence Murphy that is in charge of the house. So Alexander McSween, not wanting such a large amount of money to go to a business competitor of his who had constantly harassed his own business, whether Lawrence Murphy had any legal claim to the money or not, Alexander McSween just refused to pay him. So the house obtained a court order that allowed them to seize assets from McSween so that they could recover the money that he was supposed to pay them. But in this court order, it said that they weren't allowed to seize just McSween's property and assets, but they were also allowed to seize John Tunstall's assets. So the house saw this as a golden opportunity to go in there and take everything that the men had and eliminate the competition. The house procured the services of a lot of local hired guns. This included the John Kinney gang, the Seven Rivers Warriors, and the Jesse Evans gang, and their job was to harass Tunstall and his business and also steal cattle from him to help the house claim back the money that was owed. And this resulted in a lot of small skirmishes between the house and Tunstall's ranchers, among whom was Billy the Kid. Eventually, to stop his livestock from constantly being stolen, John Tunstall and the other ranchers gathered the livestock and were about to locate it to another secret hidden location away from the house's hired guns. But what John Tunstall didn't know is that another posse had been formed to come and seize the cattle and claim back the debt in the name of the house. And this posse was led by William J. Brady, the sheriff. And this was because the sheriff was in the house's pocket because he owed them a large debt. When Tunstall seen this posse on his land, he told his ranchers, including Billy the Kid, to stay with the livestock and protect them, and that he was going to ride out and meet the posse himself. So the rest of the ranchers stayed back and observed from a distance as John rode out to meet this posse. As Tunstall was approaching the posse, one of them shot him in the chest and he fell from his horse. Another member then walked over to where Tunstall was lying, took Tunstall's gun, and then shot him in the head with his own gun. And all of this was done in full view of Billy the Kid and the other ranchers. Billy the Kid and the other ranchers swore that they would get revenge on the house and on Sheriff Brady for murdering John Tunstall. And this started the event that would make Billy the Kid famous. The Lincoln County War. Now this is where things start to get really, really Red Dead Redemption. Billy the Kid and his close associate Dick Brewer. What a fucking name. Brewing up some dick. Anyway, Billy and Dick Brewer swore affidavits against Sheriff Brady and his posse to Justice of the Peace John B. Wilson. They told him that they had seen him commit a murder and that he had gone rogue and was abusing his powers as sheriff. John B. Wilson then deputised Billy the Kid, Dick Brewer, and the rest of the ranchers and then issued murder warrants for the killers of John Tunstall. To take down Sheriff Brady and his posse, Billy the Kid, Dick Brewer, and the rest of the ranchers formed their own posse, and they called themselves the Regulators, and all of them were now deputised. The Regulators didn't actually have a single leader, instead they were led by 12 men, of which Billy the Kid was one, and these 12 men were called the Ironclad. In February of 1878, Billy and Brewer spotted Sheriff Brady travelling with his posse, so Billy and Brewer just rode right up to them, told them that they were now deputised, and they were here to arrest Sheriff Brady and the rest of his men. Sheriff Brady and his men said, "No you," and arrested Billy and Brewer. During the arrest, Brady confiscated for himself Billy the Kid's treasured Winchester rifle. Now, Billy the Kid was always very good at keeping his cool, even when he was in the jailhouse and the guards were making fun of him. Billy was always able to keep a level head, but Billy was absolutely furious that Brady had stolen his rifle. Eventually, other members of the Regulators stormed the jailhouse. They freed Billy and Brewer and put the jail guards in the cells, you know, the old switcheroo. Then all the Regulators got on their horses and rode out into the wilderness to try and track down Sheriff Brady and his posse. Eventually, the Regulators caught up with 3 members of Brady's posse, but of those 3 members, only one of them had actually directly taken part in John Tunstall's murder, and that was a man called Buck Morton. The Regulators chased the 3 guys for 8 kilometres, gunfighting with them the entire time, until eventually the 3 guys gave up and surrendered to the Regulators. Now this is where stuff starts to get a little bit fishy. Apparently, as the Regulators were bringing the 3 prisoners back to Lincoln, the Regulators were all saying, we should just kill them now and get it over and done with. But one of the Regulators, a man called William McCloskey, prevented them from doing that. And William McCloskey was actually a friend of Buck Morton's, so William was insisting that they bring the 3 men in alive. While riding back, the men reached a place called Blackwater Creek, and what the Regulators say happened is that Buck Morton was somehow able to grab someone's gun, where Buck then shot and killed William McCloskey, and then Buck and the rest of the prisoners tried to make a run for it, so the Regulators were left with no choice but to gun down all of the prisoners. Everyone found it a little bit strange that Buck Morton would kill William McCloskey, because McCloskey was Buck Morton's only friend in the Regulators, and the only reason that Buck Morton and the other prisoners were still alive was because of McCloskey. So it's a little bit strange that Buck would kill the only person that was keeping them alive. So what a lot of people think happened is that the Regulators went to kill the prisoners anyway. McCloskey tried to stop them, so the Regulators killed McCloskey, then killed the prisoners, and then blamed McCloskey's death on the prisoners. This event eventually became known as the Blackwater Massacre. Later that same day, another group of Regulators caught up with 2 members of Sheriff Brady's posse, and a gunfight started, and of the 2 members of Sheriff Brady's posse, one was killed and the other was severely wounded and captured. Brady started to panic a little bit because he and his men were actually losing to the Regulators. So what Brady decided to do was write to the territorial governor for assistance and basically lied about what was really going on. This resulted in Wilson, the Justice of the Peace who deputised Billy the Kid and the Regulators, being removed from office, which rendered all of his decrees invalid. The Regulators were now no longer deputised, and Sheriff Brady and his men were now the only recognised law officers in Lincoln County. The Regulators' actions up until this point had been completely legal because they were deputised, but as they were no longer deputised, if they decided to continue with their mission, they would be considered wanted men and arrested. But they were so hell-bent on getting revenge on Sheriff Brady and the house that they decided to continue with their mission anyway. And eventually, they would get their revenge on Sheriff Brady. Sheriff Brady and his deputies were walking down the main street of Lincoln, but what they didn't know is that hidden around the street were members of the Regulators, including Billy the Kid. And when someone gave the signal, all of the Regulators jumped out and opened fire on Sheriff Brady and his men. Sheriff Brady was hit over a dozen times and was killed instantly. A gunfight had now started between the deputies and the Regulators, and while there was bullets flying everywhere, Billy the Kid decided to run out into the middle of the street to Sheriff Brady's corpse to steal back his Winchester rifle. Billy the Kid did manage to grab his rifle, but as he was running away, he got shot in the thigh. But despite this, Billy the Kid and the rest of the Regulators managed to escape. A few days later, the Regulators were heading for a place called Blazer's Mill because they received information that one of Tunstall's murderers was hiding out there, a man called Buckshot Roberts. And as the Regulators were approaching the mill, Buckshot seen them and opened fire, and this started a gunfight. In the gunfight, Buckshot was killed, but before he was killed, Buckshot managed to actually wound 4 members of the Regulators, and he managed to kill Dick Brewer. R.I.P. Dick Brewer. He's off to that big Dick Brewery in the sky. Since Sheriff Brady was dead, another sheriff had to be appointed in his place, and this was a man called John Copeland, but John Copeland, as sheriff, actually refused to take sides in the Lincoln County War, so the House used their power and influence to replace him with another man who would be on their side, and this was a man called George Pepin. In July of 1978, the Regulators heard that Pepin and his posse were coming to kill Alexander McSween, who was at his house in Lincoln. So 60 Regulators descended on the town of Lincoln and took up defensive positions all over the town, but mainly around Alexander McSween's house. Pepin and his posse arrived and engaged the Regulators. This kicked off a massive gunfight that lasted for 5 days, and this gunfight was called the Battle of Lincoln. Billy the Kid was only around 18 at this time, but during this battle, Billy the Kid and his Winchester rifle were going pop, 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 making cowboys drop, and this battle is what made so many people so afraid of Billy the Kid, because a lot of people found out, some the hard way, that Billy the Kid was actually very skilled in a gunfight. There were heavy losses on both sides, but what the Regulators didn't know is that Sheriff Pepin had actually called in for support from the US Army, and they arrived in force, and when the Regulators seen them coming, they took shelter in Tunstall's store and in McSween's house, which was all well and good until the US Army started blasting these buildings with cannons. While taking refuge in McSween's house, Pepin and his posse set fire to the building, leaving all the men inside no choice but to escape out the back door. But as they were all retreating out the back door, Alexander McSween was shot and killed by a man called Robert Beckwith. And then Robert Beckwith was immediately shot and killed himself by Billy the Kid. A lot of the Regulators were either killed or captured. The Regulators had lost the Battle of Lincoln. So Billy the Kid and the few remaining Regulators vanished into the wilderness to live as outlaws. In 1878, US Marshal John Sherman appealed to the newly appointed territorial governor for assistance, saying that due to the Lincoln County War, the entire county had been thrown into disarray and anarchy, and he was having trouble managing the situation and carrying out his duties. So the territorial governor issued a decree stating that everyone who took part in the Lincoln County War would be pardoned, which meant that they were absolutely free from prosecution. So once everyone learned of this, everyone stopped killing each other, came out of hiding, came back to the town, and just went about their daily lives almost as if nothing at all had happened. And finally, order was restored to Lincoln County. However, this decree had a few exceptions. For example, anyone who was convicted or indicted of an offence during the Lincoln County War, well, those convictions and warrants would still be valid and would still stand. And since Billy the Kid had a warrant issued for him during the Lincoln County War for the murder of Sheriff William Brady, that meant that Billy the Kid would be receiving no pardon and he would still remain a wanted man. How shit is that? How shit is that? The Lincoln County War, hundreds of people took part in that. Hundreds of people killed hundreds of other people. And every single one of them got a pardon. All except for Billy the Kid. All of you are pardoned for all of your crimes, except that prick that was camping with a Winchester. In 1879, when Billy and a friend of his had snuck back into Lincoln on business, they were actually forced at gunpoint to watch Jesse Evans, the leader of the Jesse Evans gang, murder a man called Houston Chapman and then set his body on fire. I don't know why Jesse Evans forced them to watch this, weird flex, but okay. Billy then wrote to Governor Wallace, telling Governor Wallace that he had actually seen the murder of Houston Chapman and that he was willing to testify against Jesse Evans and the Jesse Evans gang in exchange for a full pardon, immunity, and protection from retribution from the Jesse Evans gang. Billy and the governor wrote to each other several times, and they even met in person to discuss this arrangement, and after a while the governor eventually agreed to Billy's terms to give him a pardon in exchange for him testifying against Jesse Evans. It was arranged so that an unbiased sheriff not linked to the house would be the one to bring Billy the Kid in, and this was a man called George Kimball. So George and Billy met at a secure location. Billy the Kid surrendered to George, and George immediately took Billy down to the jailhouse and locked him in a cell, because that was the only way that they could guarantee his safety. So Billy testified against Jesse Evans in front of a grand jury. As soon as Billy was finished, he was taken to the jailhouse again and put in a cell to keep him safe. So Billy had upheld his part of the deal. There was just one problem. The jailhouse was refusing to set Billy free. I mean, come on, you all saw that coming. Billy waited in prison for a few weeks, writing to Governor Wallace, reminding him, hi there, it's me, Billy the Kid, still in jail. You kind of promised me that this wouldn't happen, DM me back. After a while, Billy realised that Governor Wallace had tried to pull a fast one on him, so Billy the Kid just did his usual and slipped out of the bars and escaped the prison. Just put thicker bars. Just put thicker bars on the fucking prison, Jesus Christ. Billy was once again on the run as a wanted man and an outlaw, except this time he had a $500 bounty on his head, which meant that bounty hunters were now after him. Billy laid low until January of 1880, when he was hiding out at Fort Sumner, New Mexico, and he was drinking in the local saloon when he noticed that another man who was drinking in the saloon kept staring at him. The man who kept staring at him was called Joe Grant. Now, there are a few different versions of this story, so I'm going to just tell the one that's most reported and seems most plausible. The other patrons informed Billy that they heard a rumour that Joe Grant was a bounty hunter. A bounty hunter that kept staring at Billy. Billy knew he had to do something about this situation, so he just walked right up to Joe, complimented Joe's gun, and asked him if he could see it. Joe, very puzzled, handed the gun over to Billy, and Billy inspected the gun. Billy noticed that only 3 of the chambers were loaded. Joe only had 3 bullets, so what Billy did was he turned the cylinder so that the next hammerfall would land on an empty chamber. Billy handed the gun back to Joe, and Joe put it back in his holster. Billy then started talking a lot of smack to Joe and making fun of him, trying to get Joe all worked up. Joe flew into a rage, pulled out his pistol, pointed it at Billy's face, and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty chamber. Billy then immediately drew his own gun and shot Joe in the head. Self-defense. When Billy was later asked about this incident, he apparently said, "It was a game of 2 and I got there first." Later that year, Billy and other outlaws were hiding out at a place called Great House Ranch when the ranch was surrounded by a posse led by Deputy Sheriff James Carlisle, and a shootout started. Billy and the outlaws were actually friends with the ranch owner, Jim Greathouse, but they bluffed and shouted out from the cabin that they were holding Jim Greathouse hostage when they weren't really. Carlisle offered to swap places with the hostage, and Billy the Kid agreed, so they let Jim Greathouse go and let the unarmed Carlisle come inside. Billy the Kid most likely did this to get Jim Greathouse to safety. James Carlisle tried to then escape out of an open window, but he was shot dead by one of the other outlaws, and the shootout continued, and the shootout finally ended when the posse was forced to withdraw, and Billy the Kid and the other outlaws used this opportunity to escape. A few weeks after that, Billy and his men tried to return to Fort Sumner, but what they didn't know is that a posse was waiting for them. A posse led by a man called Sheriff Pat Garrett, who Billy the Kid would end up becoming very, very familiar with. In the shootout that occurred, one of Billy's men was killed, but Billy and the rest of his men managed to escape. Sheriff Pat Garrett and his posse continued their hunt for Billy the Kid, and in December of 1880, they managed to finally get the drop on Billy the Kid and his men by jumping them at a place called Stinking Springs, and Billy the Kid and his men were completely unprepared, and all of them were captured. Sheriff Garrett took the prisoners to Las Vegas, and the next day he was to take them down to the train station to take them to Santa Fe, where they would stand trial. But as he arrived at the train station with his prisoners, very large, very angry, and very armed crowd had gathered demanding that Garrett hand over one of the prisoners, but they weren't asking for Billy the Kid. They were asking for one of Billy's men, a man called Dave Rudabaugh. It turns out that Rudabaugh, in the past, had killed a local jailer, and the townsfolk remembered, and they were demanding that Garrett hand Rudabaugh over to their custody so that they could execute him. There was a lot of heated back and forth until it was eventually agreed that Rudabaugh could go to Santa Fe as long as Garrett asked the governor to hand Rudabaugh over to the custody of the townsfolk so that they could execute him. Billy was apparently quoted as saying, "If only I had my Winchester, I'd lick the whole crowd." Billy was taken to Santa Fe jail, and while he was incarcerated there, he wrote several letters to Governor Wallace asking him to uphold his end of the deal and remember his promise. But Governor Wallace refused. Billy stood trial for the murder of Sheriff William Brady and was found guilty and sentenced to death. And apparently when the judge was reading the sentence, he said, "You will hang until you are dead, dead, dead." And apparently Billy responded, "Well, you can go to hell, hell, hell." After the trial, Billy was brought back to Lincoln for execution, and he was held in the top floor of the Lincoln courthouse under heavy guard. While Sheriff Garrett was out of town, one of his deputies named Bob Ollinger was left in charge of the courthouse, and Bob Ollinger had taken some of the prisoners and some of his men across the road to the local saloon so that they could all get something to eat, leaving another deputy named James Bell alone in the courthouse to guard Billy the Kid. Billy asked James if he could take him outside to use the outhouse. So James took Billy out. Billy had his arms and legs shackled and led him outside to the outhouse. Billy used the outhouse and then came back inside the building with James walking behind him. But Billy made sure to walk very, very fast to put a lot of distance between him and James, and as soon as Billy reached the top of the stairs, he ducked around a corner and managed to slip out of his handcuffs. When James reached the top of the stairs, Billy jumped him and started beating him with the blunt end of the handcuffs, and then they started struggling over James's gun, but Billy managed to grab the gun. James tried to run away, and Billy shot him in the back, killing him. Billy's legs were still shackled, but he managed to break into Sheriff Garrett's office and stole a loaded shotgun. Billy grabbed the shotgun and waited at the upstairs window because he knew that Bob Ollinger would have heard the gunshot and would be coming back to investigate. And right enough, Bob Ollinger had heard the gunshot and was coming back over to investigate. As he was walking towards the courthouse, Billy the Kid shouted from the upstairs window, "Look up, old boy, and see what you get." Bob Ollinger looked up, and Billy blasted him with a shotgun, killing him instantly. Billy managed to find a hatchet inside the courthouse and he used that to break his leg restraints. He then ran outside, stole a horse and rode out of town, and apparently, according to some eyewitness accounts, Billy the Kid was actually singing as he left town. Billy remained on the run for about 3 months, and Sheriff Garrett was even more determined not just to bring Billy in, but to kill him. And Sheriff Garrett and his deputies heard a rumour that Billy the Kid was hanging around Fort Sumner and he was being sheltered by a friend of his called Pete Maxwell. Garrett and 2 of his deputies left Lincoln for Fort Sumner to travel to the house of Pete Maxwell to question him. Now, this is where the story gets a little bit sloppy and kinda hard to verify. It turns out that Billy the Kid was staying with Maxwell and was supposed to be coming back that very night, but there's 2 different versions as to what people think happened. Either Sheriff Garrett interrogated Maxwell and Maxwell betrayed Billy the Kid and told Garrett and his men that Billy was supposed to be coming back that night, and Sheriff Garrett and his men lay in wait for him. Or it was a case of Sheriff Garrett was interrogating Maxwell, Maxwell wasn't telling Garrett anything, but while the interrogation was going on, Billy, just in a sheer stroke of absolute bad luck, just so happened to come back. So, as far as the events go, you know, those are the 2 main ones that people think happened. Sheriff Garrett and Pete Maxwell were sitting in Maxwell's bedroom, and Billy the Kid entered the property, walked down the hall, and looked directly into Maxwell's bedroom, straight at Sheriff Garrett, and Sheriff Garrett was looking straight at Billy the Kid. But the problem was, the house was very poorly lit, so all the two men could see were silhouettes. They knew they were looking at someone, but neither of them could make out who they were looking at. Garrett didn't know it was Billy he was looking at, and Billy didn't know it was Garrett he was looking at. All Billy knew is that this silhouette was not Maxwell. So Billy started to cautiously, slowly back away while asking in Spanish, "Who is it? Who is it?" And as soon as Garrett heard him speak, he recognised the voice, and he knew it was Billy the Kid. And again, there are two different accounts for what happened next. The first account is, as Billy was backing away, sensing danger, he drew his gun. The second account is, as Billy was backing away, he did not draw his gun. But either way, Pat Garrett drew his own gun and shot Billy twice in the chest, the first bullet hitting him in the heart. And Billy the Kid, at the age of 21, fell to the floor and died. A few hours after his death, the Justice of the Peace put together a coroner's jury who examined the site of the shooting, they interviewed Maxwell, and they also examined Billy the Kid's body, and all the members of the jury confirmed that this body was in fact Billy the Kid. Billy the Kid was buried the very next day at the old Fort Sumner Cemetery in New Mexico, and you can still go and visit his grave today, but they've had to cover it in a big secure cage because people kept vandalising the gravesite and stealing the headstones. The next day, Sheriff Garrett travelled all the way to Santa Fe so that he could claim his $500 reward for killing Billy the Kid. But for some reason, the governor just refused to pay him. But a lot of the local townsfolk who were thankful to Sheriff Garrett for killing Billy the Kid, they all chipped together some money to give to him as a reward, and Sheriff Garrett ended up getting over $7,000. Not everyone was pleased with Sheriff Garrett for killing Billy the Kid, though. A lot of people were saying that Sheriff Garrett unfairly ambushed Billy the Kid and it wasn't a fair fight and it was pretty dishonourable. Some people even said that Sheriff Garrett just outright murdered Billy the Kid, but some people even went as far as to say that Sheriff Garrett faked the entire thing. There are people who still to this day say that Sheriff Garrett faked the entire thing. Some have even went so far as to file lawsuits against the state of New Mexico to either force them to release documents or so that they can be allowed to exhume bodies and carry out DNA tests. The last of these attempts happened just in 2015. Some people back in the day, as late as 1940, were even claiming to be Billy the Kid, but almost all of these cases turned out to be complete bullshit. But apparently there's two cases that seem a tiny bit plausible, but not really. Historians still argue an awful lot to this day about how some of the events in Billy the Kid's life really went, and there is a lot of misinformation out there about him. Some people claim that he killed over 200 people when there's been 9 confirmed killings that have in fact been done by Billy the Kid, but the most reasonable estimate is about 21. And another thing as well is you sometimes get people or antique shops trying to sell actual, genuine Billy the Kid wanted posters, but these are all fakes. It's a scam. There were no wanted posters created at all for Billy the Kid. The only thing that Billy the Kid really got was wanted ads in newspapers, no posters. Historians are even arguing about photographs of Billy the Kid. For the longest time, the only absolutely 100% confirmed photo of Billy the Kid is the one that you've all seen, the one where he's posing with his trademark top hat and Winchester rifle. There is another photo which is sort of 50-50, which appears to show Billy the Kid playing croquet with a friend, but this one hasn't been confirmed to be genuine or not. But recently, another picture has surfaced that has been confirmed to actually be Billy the Kid, and the reason it's been confirmed as real is because it shows Billy the Kid with other confirmed members of the Regulators, including Dick Brewer. So there you go, we actually have a second actual confirmed picture of Billy the Kid, and you see his face a lot clearer in this one as well. And this one actually just went on sale a few weeks ago, valued at $1 million. There are even people who still to this day are petitioning to the state of New Mexico to give Billy the Kid a posthumous pardon so that they can honour the agreement that the governor made with him all those years ago. The last attempt at this was in 2010, and the governor at the time said no. As far as influence in pop culture, fucking take your pick. I mean, Billy the Kid, you know, has had over 50 movies made about him, you know, ranging from the silent era to now. Places in New Mexico that are even the tiniest bit associated with Billy the Kid all have a Billy the Kid museum. You know, there are so many Billy the Kid museums in New Mexico. But I would probably say the best place to go would be Lincoln itself. You know, it is a little bit of a ghost town now, but there are so many things in the town that you can actually see that are still there from Billy the Kid's day. For example, there is Tunstall Store, there's the Houses store, and there's even the courthouse that Billy the Kid escaped from. And there's even a marker on the ground outside it showing the exact spot where Billy the Kid killed Ollinger from the window. Whenever I'm talking about a mad lad, I usually try and do the Philly D approach and sort of sit in the fence and say, but what do you guys think? Why don't you tell me in the comments down below and really drive up my engagement rating for this video? But well, I'm just gonna come out and say it. Billy the Kid did nothing wrong. Billy the Kid did absolutely nothing wrong. I mean, a lot of the killings that are attested to him were clear self-defense. And see all the stuff that happened afterwards totally wouldn't have happened if the governor just honoured the agreement and gave Billy his pardon. If the governor just honoured the agreement and gave Billy his pardon, none of this would have happened. You had two opportunities to pardon him, right? The first was after the Battle of Lincoln when you were fucking dishing out fucking pardons like Halloween candy, right? You could have done it then, but you didn't, so more bad shit happened. And then when he testified against Jesse Evans, you could have done it then, but you didn't, and even more bad shit happened. All of that could have been fucking avoided if you had just honoured your agreement to Billy the Kid, right? I don't blame the guy at all, right? Mother died of tuberculosis, abusive stepfather. He was in the world on his own when he was just 14 and had no money. Of course he got involved in crime. But a lot of the, you know, crime that he did, like the killings, the first ones were self-defense. Like, Billy the Kid got a raw deal. He got fucked over. He absolutely did get fucked over, and I don't blame him at all for turning out the way that he did, right? I don't agree with everything that he did, right? I definitely don't agree with everything that he did, right? But all of it could have been avoided if you weren't such a piece of shit, Governor.
A few weeks to realise the governor was... Oh. Okay, well, I'm going to leave, because I was going to try and pretend to be you and be like, Billy the Kid did nothing wrong, but then... I realised there was too much to try and do.
My job's hard, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's Count Dankula on YouTube. Everybody should subscribe. Yeah.